Show on East Coast FM with Declan Meehan.
Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Check out eastcoast.fm for more.
East Coast FM.
Two more of our candidates for general election 2016. Sitting TD is Andrew Doyle of Fine Gael. He's chair of the Oireachtas Committee on Agriculture and Food. And also with us is Green Party candidate Stephen Matthews. You're both very welcome. Thanks for coming in. And one thing that's in common with you both, whether you agree fully with each other or not, is that we all have to face, of course, climate change and what has come out of Paris. So what's the government's policy, Andrew, on that for the future? We haven't really heard a lot of it in the debate so far.
No, and it was interesting. It came up last night on the leaders' debate with Miriam when she asked a question about climate change. Look, the reality is the Paris Agreement and every other agreement that has passed has set targets on greenhouse gas emissions reduction and setting those targets. And every country that has signed up to them, and this time probably more than any other agreement, have to meet them. At the same time, we face sort of facts that the population of the planet is growing, that the demand for food is growing, and there has to be a sustainable way of producing food, living on the planet, and still sustaining the planet as well, because without that we don't exist, none of us.
But isn't the dairy, or not the dairy, the cows themselves the problem, because they're producing the gases, and we produce more than we actually need, so it's a good export to go put the meat out, but we're messing up the planet by having all the cows.
It's not... It is not simple, and it's not it's simplistic in a way to draw it that. For instance, grass is a sequester of carbon. The only animals that can properly digest and process grass are ruminants, so four stomachs, cattle, sheep, etc. If you leave grass and don't...
Well, then we do corn then instead, or something.
Well, then you see, you're losing a sequester of grass. When you turn over ground open it up, plough it or whatever, even with men-till, you actually open up carbon where you're not sequestering it. And that's, like, there's parts of Africa that were once covered in grass and buffalo. When the buffalo disappeared, the grass degraded, and just wasted away.
So what you're really saying is that we need the cows. We need cows to be producing all the greenhouse gases at their backside, isn't it?
Well, front and back. They need to be doing it much more efficiently. That's the whole point. And the other thing is, if like a cow or just a bovine produces milk and meat and leather, for that matter, at the end of their cycle, and if it was properly done, their offal can be used, slaughterhouse waste can be used for energy production. So there are all sorts of uses for the animal, but we have to take this in its full context. I was chair of the committee in the last Dáil. We produced a land use optimising its usage report, which included the use of food production, energy production, carbon sequestration through forestry in particular, and others, so that, unless we have an international standards, we can't actually say who is the most efficient. And just one point I make, to be a little bit facetious about it, we have a higher than most higher percentage than most European countries in agricultural output, and part of the reason for that is we don't have heavy industry. Now, if Bosch come over here and opened up 20 plants and Volkswagen opened up another couple, we would actually reduce our emissions. They might not be as efficient as where they're producing it, but we would reduce our emission percentage from agriculture straight away without having to deal with efficiency.
Right, because we've got
efficiency
industry
we have to deal with.
Okay, so it's a big picture. It's not just cows, Stephen Matthews, but outline the Green Party policy on agriculture and climate change and how agriculture comes into it.
Well, thanks, Declan, for bringing up climate change, because it's an issue that all the parties have avoided throughout this campaign.
Maybe you often say to me, stereotypically, you talk to me about climate change. I know Greens are interested in other issues too.
And all the other factors that impact on climate change, and it's the most important issue that's going to face us as a country and as a planet. There's no doubt about it. But what I would say is that the leaders last night, they were caught like rabbits in the headlight when climate change was brought up. And there's no party except the Green Party has a proper policy and a view of climate change and the impacts of it. Now, if
Andrew was pretty impressive there. Now,
Andrew knows his facts, and I've researched Andrew before we came on, and I've watched his speeches in the Dáil, and I know he understands this, and I know he gets it, and I know he understands the concepts of sustainability, so I'm not going to criticise him for that. But you can't avoid the fact that intensive farming is having a detrimental effect on our environment and is producing a higher proportion of greenhouse gases than any other industry in the country. Now, the nature of intensive farming not only puts pressure on the landscape and puts pressure in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, it's also putting tremendous pressure on farmers as well, this intensive supply. And farm prices, the price for their product is being driven down at the moment, and farmers are working very, very hard. And the point needs to be made that Irish food is amongst the best in the world. It's well recognised, and an environment that's clean and a country that recognises that we need to protect our environment, that's one of the best marketing tools we can ever have for our food.
But there's two points that Andrew brought up. One was the mitigating of having, say, forestry to take in some of the carbon, obviously, from the air, but also the fact that if we got more industry in, well, the percentages would change and agriculture would, say, remain the same, but it would have a lesser percentage impact. So if you can criticise,
bring in industries that produce more emissions to make agriculture.
Yeah, but that was the point of how we look at it. But the forestry really is the main one.
I think you may have misinterpreted him there. Let him in there now to clear that.
It would be facetious to say that, and you wouldn't have to deal with efficiency if you just do that. I said that's a simplistic way of looking at it.
But the forestry was the answer.
Let's
really,
get
was
back
it?
to sequestration of carbon. Okay,
which means what?
Our forestry policy in this country is not good enough. We need to plant more trees. There's no doubt about it, and not trees just for cleaning the air and for the nice landscape view of them as well. But planting of trees can mitigate against flooding as well. And that's a really important issue. And one thing that's not been mentioned here is that farmers are going to be hit so hard by climate change. They are the ones that are going to suffer disproportionately. It's going to increase temperatures. That's going to have an impact on crop production. We're going to see more flooding. Land won't be as usable as much of the year. Cattle will have to be stored for longer. More slurry will produce and have to be stored. Slurry is a waste. If we increase the dairy herd by 50%, what are we going to do with the slurry? We had a nitrates directive that came in 1990 from Europe, and we had a derogation on for a long, long time, and we still haven't dealt with that issue properly. Now, if we increase the herd by 50%, we're going to have a lot more disperse and into our rivers and our watercourses, and we're actually overstretching the soil and the land by this intensive farming. We need balance in it.
Okay, so how would you do it? What's your solution
for our farmers? Rather than having them compete
in
a
solution,
very intensive world market, we need to get farmers a better price at home here and encourage more consumption of good quality food in this country. And unfortunately, good quality food costs money. The farmers are not getting the price for the food that they need, and
I wake up in County Wicklow after a Green government gets the majority of seats, and what changes for me? And what changes for me? The impact of your policy on us would be what?
Look, farmers probably need to diversify and go away from traditional farming methods. Actually, if we talk about traditional farming methods, traditional farming in this country would have been organic in its nature before the intensive agriculture came in. And the other aspect about it as well, the amount of fertilizer, the amount of embedded energy in fertilizer is also contributory to greenhouse gases as well. We're trying to drive too much out of the land too intensively, and it's not working. It's putting pressure on farmers. It's driving food prices down. It's not working as a policy and as a market. Now, I would look for farmers to diversify into, and I know we're going to get on to wind, but why not farm wind? Why not farm solar? Why not biomass? Why not all those other areas? Produce energy rather than food.
Okay, Andrew, energy rather than food. There's sustainability. We need it. They'll get a good income. They get a better income in the future. Stephen fears for the prices that will be there ultimately.
Just one point I outlined at the beginning. Unless we're going to curtail the population of the planet, there's going to be a higher food demand. Global food supply is going to increase. And if you're going to deal with this, and this is a global effort, the international climate change agreements are global. And if we pick somewhere who can, a country or a climate or an area on the planet that can actually produce food more efficiently from the carbon output point of view. I don't disagree with the idea of producing other things, and that's what the whole report we did. But one of the things that comes up, and it's a buzz phrase at the moment, is sustainable intensification, which means that if we, just to clarify one point, if we produced 50% extra milk, say, we don't need to do that by increasing the herd by 50%. And we coined a phrase which was used after, you get better before you get bigger, because there's no point in being a busy fool. So people who, and we've seen this in the north and in New Zealand where dairy farmers have just increased output, but they're actually chasing a cash flow. That's all they're doing. They're not chasing profit, they're chasing cash flow. And there is other aspects to it, like, you know, which we also dealt with in the last 5 years, and this was all party and non-committee on the grocery sector and the retailers' dominance and all the rest of it, which returns a better price to the primary producer. But at the end of the day, we need to produce food as efficiently as possible. We can do that in this country. Knowledge transfer, carbon footprinting every animal, every production system, and yes, and the total land use policy. There is whatever there is in hectares in this country. We need to use every as much of it as possible to its best potential.
And do you agree with any of the organic farming, the greater range of food?
Organic farming has a role, but like I can tell you, and I'm not the one that says this, but I believe it. I was at the Greening of Irish Agriculture conference with former Deputy Liz McManus many years ago. A Dutch lady was addressing it. From the point of view of carbon efficiency, organic is not necessarily the most efficient, and that's a fact. But at the scale that we need to do it at. Now, there's traditional and there's sustainable intensification, which is not fully organic, but it's certainly, and it's about crop rotation. That's why sugar beet was a big loss for loads of other reasons. It's about proper crop rotation, herd health, animal health, and good grassland management. They're the essentials to it. I mean, this is. It sounds simple. It is simple, but it's complicated to get.
Okay, and final word on agriculture in that context of climate change.
Well, just one point I would make on it: the production of meat is hugely. It's about 19 times more than just the production of a vegetarian food base. So that's something that people will have to think about in the future. Can we continue to produce as much meat as we possibly can? And that might be one of the areas that would.
I know 2.5 Crow Parks of cows. A cow has to eat 2.5 times Crow Park in order to produce a pound of meat.
Yeah,
I know those sort of...
Yeah, and those figures don't add up anymore.
Yeah, but we heard about all the leather and the offal and all that sort of stuff. The efficiency of it. But listen...
I wouldn't like to be having the argument get rid of a cow in India anyway.
Okay, cows can walk around, they're sacred, aren't they?
They're sacred.
Yeah, that's right.
But anyway...
But they're a vegetarian nation.
The cows have to give away.
And on wind farms, as we mentioned there, rural area, Andrew, for wind farms, and I know the South Wicklow group have been very vocal. They're talking about the size of them, they're talking about distance, they're talking about maybe they don't even gain from it. You can't store wind. What are you doing producing it all and you can't even store it? What's the story with wind?
Well, I mean, a few years ago we were criticised when I was a member of Wicklow County Council for not having a wind energy strategy in our county development plan. So in 2004 one was put in. A couple of things have changed, I would say, since then, and that's the scale of wind. Look, everything, like wind is no different to anything else. It's not, there's no magic bullet, there's no solution. It is part of the solution. It's not the only one, and it has to be, cognizance has to be taken of where they are, the landscape and the scale. There was one, for instance, in South Wicklow, which was proposing to put 150 metre high towers on 300 metre high hills. They weren't even tucked in between or anything else. They were on top of them. So I don't think, and it was linear. It wasn't in any way sympathetic with the landscape, and it was refused actually by Wicklow County Council. I think there's another effort to get another one up. There is actually. So, like, to simply say, I'm not against wind, but I'm against it just being put willy-nilly. And the other thing is that the first thing that has to be done with wind or with anything else is there has to be community buy-in, and there has to be some sort of community gain, and where they work and where the examples of where they work is actually where that is the process that's undergone first and foremost. And that's not just wind, but it is particularly true about onshore wind, on land wind, on land.
Okay. Stephen Matthews of the Green Party, you're always portrayed cornerstone of the Greens. Let's have all these wind turbines everywhere.
Well, I'd agree with Andrew on the point about the massive industrial wind farms and the impact they can have on the communities where these companies are proposing to place them. Now, you have to ask the question, why are these companies wanting to invest in wind? Because they know it's going to be part of the future menu of our energy sources. They also know there's money to be made out of it. Now, what I would like to see is a community buy-in, like Andrew says, where there's an economic benefit back for the communities on smaller scale and more of the wind farms, but not these huge industrial ones. Like, I would have great sympathy for anybody who looks at a planning proposal where they see these huge wind turbines being placed. But back to the council strategy, and Andrew referred to the time he was on Wicklow County Council. At the moment, Andrew's party are putting pen to paper on a 500 to 600 metre setback, which will be the national strategy. But on Wicklow County Council, his councillors are proposing a 1,000 metre setback. Now, that effectively rules out any wind production in Wicklow into the future. Now, we have to accept wind won't be the silver bullet. It's not going to cure all our energy needs. There has to be a lot more. We have to look at wave. There's a company down in Limerick who are, I think they've cracked it now at the moment, and I hope that they have wave generation. We have an abundance of natural resources in this country. Solar power will work in this country. You may not think it looking at cloudy skies, but it doesn't necessarily need to be direct sunshine. So there has to be a whole package of measures brought together. But at the other end, we have to look at energy efficiency. Now, we're spending €7 billion per year on imported gases and oils. Now, oil is low in price at the moment, but it may go up, and that's going to affect our economy dramatically. We're at the end of the pipeline. We need to start looking and building some resilience into our economy and resilience into our country, that we can provide confidence for investors that we will have energy that's affordable. We don't want to be the most expensive country in Europe for energy, because companies won't come here. It's a massive
wind part of it, but you want less than 1,000 setback.
It's not feasible to have a 1,000 metre setback in Wicklow.
You're building in, you won't be able to build it in the first place. What's your ideal? You don't live beside one, so, but what is your ideal?
My ideal
setback.
Well, you see, you have to think about it. If you have a 600 metre setback and you're looking at the landscape, if the landscape is rising in front of you, then that actually turbine will be higher from the viewpoint of somebody. So they probably have to be viewed, to take each proposal on its own merits and look at the topography of the land and the geography of the land. And wind turbines will only work in certain areas. They won't work in urban areas because wind...
Okay, and community buy-in?
Definitely. The Danish model is the one I would look at. There's about a 20% community kickback, and the Scandinavians are very good on it as well. But the Scandinavians have a lot of oil and they have a lot of hydropower.
Okay, and we all agree on that. Two quick ones. One of them is the Wildlife Act, bringing burning of hedges into March and allowing, the September, I think it's an earlier start to being able to disturb the birds, Andrew. Is this a good idea?
It's the cutting of hedges and the burning of uplands. Look, there's been extensive work. I'm probably a bit more familiar with the upland burning than the hedges. The main reason for hedgerows is for inside, not so much on the roadside. It's where farmers need to go back in and till land and get it ready, that they can actually, before they sow in winter crop. It's not the only reason. With regard to uplands, there was Wicklow Uplands Council, funded by the Heritage Council actually, and others, commissioned a report by an upland environmental ecologist.
Yeah, but do you agree with this?
Yes.
You do?
I do, because if you look at what's...
But what about the wildlife?
I can guarantee you, if the uplands is managed properly, you will enhance...
Well, some birds are still nesting, and some birds are still using those trees.
In the uplands, sorry, are we talking about hedges now or uplands?
Yeah, well, both.
In the uplands, we have up on the hills up there in Wicklow, we're growing fuel, heather that's gone out of control. The deer will not graze, sheep won't graze, people won't be able to walk through, and then you get a sporadic fire, and there's no controlling it. And for traditional, properly managed uplands actually mean that they regenerate and they're done.
And the hedges along the sides of the road?
And the hedges along the side of the road, look, the birds in September, it has to be done under derogation, under licence, so it's a specific. The legislation has gone through the Shannon.
So there's safeguards. Is what you're
There's
saying.
safeguards. There's safeguards on both, by the way.
Yeah, Stephen.
Just on the roadside hedgerows, road safety takes precedence over that. So you can make a case out of season for cutting back hedgerows if it's for road safety. The same way as you can make a case for cutting down a tree if it becomes a public hazard. But the thing we have to remember is this: that our landscape and our biodiversity and the ecology of the country, it's a very, very carefully balanced ecosystem. Now, we all depend on it, okay? Our environment is extremely important. The economy is a subsidiary of the environment. If we destroy our environment, we don't have an economy, we don't have communities, we don't have a nice place to live. We're not an attractive place to live for tourism, for anything at all. We're not a marketable country anymore. So we need to take care of that. If you start, if species get wiped out, that has an impact on the environment. And farmers themselves depend very much on a balanced environment.
So leave it as it is.
The reasoning that seems to have been put forward for increasing it is because the climate seems to be changing. Now, are you going to continually chase that model? Because climate change is going to happen. They talk about the seasons, getting warmer sooner, and that's a downward spiral.
I just might add on the. I'm not sure about the hedging, but I make one point on the hedging. Reps. Environment schemes have added where in the 70s and 80s the thing was to clear out ditches and boundaries to make fields bigger. Reps and all the various different environment schemes since have actually had incentives to add in hedges. With regard to the burning, Scotland, which is probably more moorsy and has a lot, we're only actually in harmony with the Scottish states by moving to the end of March.
Right, well, it's out, but a lot of people, Birdwatch Ireland, people like that, are very much annoyed, and Tashka and people like that. But anyway,
quite rightly so.
So there you go. Thanks for coming in.
They have to understand that it'll be done responsibly. I mean, that's the whole thing.
But how do we police it and how do we manage it?
Because
that's the
if
issue.
you look at the legislation, it means that first of all, the environment, the officers from the National Parks and Wildlife Service.
How many
their
have we got?
funding was cut by 70%. The National Parks and Wildlife Service.
Well,
and that was under your government, Andrew. That was under your government. You can't be dependent on the National Parks and Wildlife Service if you're going to cut their funding.
I live in the middle of
the funding to Antashka.
Yes.
You cut the funding to all the environmental groups.
I live in the middle of the uplands. I can tell you there are plenty of staff up around where I live, and in Wicklow County Council Environment Section, the MPWS and the Gardaí are the.
And we've enough of them, you're saying?
Well, they all have to be informed. It has to be part of a proper managed license.
And with all the funding cuts that Stephen Matthews
that's not going to make any difference to. I can tell you that won't.
We don't need the funding then.
I didn't say that. This won't make any.
This government is talking about on reducing taxation, which provides services. And if you talk about Gardaí, how are we going to provide more Gardaí on the street if you're going to cut taxation?
More people working, paying more tax.
Hang on a minute. The argument being put forward is that if you get more money back into people's pockets, that they will spend it. That's not guaranteed. A lot of that money will be soaked up by high levels of debt, paying off mortgages and negative equity. You cannot guarantee that by putting €20 back in somebody's pocket every month, they are going to spend it on the economy. That argument doesn't stack up.
Okay, all right, we've got to leave it there on both of you. Thank you. All right, okay, thank you. We had Andrew Doyle of Fine Gael and also Stephen Matthews of the Green Party, other people standing, and you'll hear some of them later on. Joe Behan, who's independent, John Brady of Sinn Féin, Sharon Briggs, Anti-Austerity Alliance, People Before Profit, Pat Casey of Fianna Fáil, Avril Cronin of Fine Gael, Jennifer Cuff of Fianna Fáil, Stephen Donnelly of the Social Democrats, also Anna Doyle, who's from the Anti-Austerity Alliance, People Before Profit, Anne Ferris of the Labour Party, Simon Harris of Fine Gael, Katrina Hutchinson, Direct Democracy Ireland, Bob Kearns, Independent, Charlie Keddy, Independent, and Billy Timmins from Renew Ireland. Thank you.